And right, so let's switch to my desktop camera. And here we go. And so as I said, tonight we are going to be looking at a sort of wolf portrait. Wolf head, wolf face. So we're going to start off with just some very simple shapes which are going to become the wolf's head. I hope that lighting is all right. It's not too... I know what I need to do. I just need to mirror my video because I had it on... I was doing... whatchamacallit? I was doing a online tutorial of a different subject, and I mirrored my video because I was writing. And if I don't... I need to undo it because otherwise it comes out weird and you sort of get like... That's it. I can't work with my hands coming in from the wrong side. It makes me feel weird. I know it sounds really strange, but it's like having someone say, you know, pat your head and rub your stomach. I can't. If I look up and my hand's going on the wrong side, it weirds me out. Right. So we're going to start with just drawing some basic sort of structure to kind of very simple shapes that are going to gradually become our wolf's face. So like a lot of portraits, and we do sort of any animal or human that has eyes, nose, mouth, they usually start off with a cross formation. So I'm just going to draw a cross on my paper. And this is going to be a guideline for where the features are going to come. And again, I'm doing it in pencil, but you could rub out later if you wanted, or usually find that by the time you've drawn all the pattern work in, that the pen has kind of like got rid of all the pencil. You don't really notice it, particularly if we're going to stick to kind of grey tones. So it doesn't really matter if your cross is perfect or not, or so where it is. Just roughly, just know that this line here is kind of where the eyes are going to match, are going to be aligned to. So you might want to think about where you put that cross on your page, just because that's going to be where the eyes are going to come. Right, so the first sort of shape I'm going to do is like it's got two verticals coming down and then a sort of triangle shape like that. So it's like a sort of like an upside down, really simple house shape, almost like an arrow, doing like that. And that is eventually, I want to try and get them roughly even, so they are sort of symmetrical, so that our wolf is sort of symmetrical. So I've got that sort of shape there. It's like a sort of like a big arrow coming down, and the top of it comes up to the eye line there. And then I'm going to do a shape which is going to become the nose of the wolf. So again, you might just want to watch this first side and then you can kind of see what I'm doing. So it's just going to be a long, like one of our big teardrop shapes really, but it's going to be coming down on that side, and the same again on this side. And you'll find that a lot of these shapes are quite related to some of the patterns that we draw anyway. They're just done on a bigger scale. I know at the moment it looks really peculiar. It will start to make a bit more sense as we go on. So when I've got that sort of shape there, I'm now going to do a shape for kind of the outline of the wolf's face. So that's sort of where the top of his head's going to come, sort of up there. And his chin, if I continue this line down here, they have kind of like a sort of beard formation of sort of fluff, I suppose, or hair that comes down almost like a sort of beard shape. So that's just to sort of help mark those sort of in. And again, if I do one side, you might just want to watch this. So the line's going to come out, it's going to come fatter, slightly below the eye line. So I've got a curve kind of coming down there. And then it's going to come down to that chin point like that. So I suppose it's sort of pointy shape at the bottom and then slightly more rounded at the top. And if I put in where his ear is going to come, which is going to be somewhere up there on that side, that might give you a better idea of kind of how this face is starting to hang together. Let me just tilt the light away a bit because it's kind of eaten the eye a bit, the ear a bit there, but you can sort of see. So I've done that half in, then I'm going to try and do a roughly symmetrical same thing on this side. So this is kind of the bottom of the ruff that kind of comes in there, and let's try and get those bumps roughly the same sort of point. There we go. And then the ear again. I'm just going to draw mine. I've got to avoid doing it on the masking tape. I might have to move that masking tape, otherwise that tiny bit of ear is going to disappear out of the picture. So let me just slightly readjust that tape. There we go. Otherwise he's going to lose the tip of his ear. There we go. So that's sort of the sort of shape that we're working on. And then if I put the eyes in, it'll start to again make a bit more sense. So if I start off with two circles, they're on the eye line and they're just above where that nose sort of comes in So I'm just going to start with 2 circles, but obviously that's just the pupils of his eye, and then we can put in the more elongated eye shape. I think this one's working a bit better. I think I made that one a bit too... Let's move it back a bit. That's better. So you want to just... So it's cutting across the pupil a bit. Otherwise it'll look a bit starey. Like he's a very surprised wolf. And then you get this sort of eyebrow line that comes over the top and sort of down. Like that. So we've got that sort of face starting to appear a bit more. And then if I put the nose in, the nose is going to come in this sort of end section here. And you can see how all sorts of dogs are basically going to work on that sort of shape. I think I'm just going to move, looking at his now, I think his eyes on my one are a bit close together. So I've probably got his rubbish pencil rubber, so I'm just going to move my eyes sideways outward a little bit because they looked a bit too close together. The good thing about doing structures like this is it lets you see what you're doing before you get into the bulk of the drawing. So if you're going to make any mistakes, do them now, because then you can alter them. That's better. Look, he doesn't look quite so boss-eyed. That's better. And again, all these will be covered up by all the pen work. So that's better. And you can see then it's quite a useful demonstration. If you feel that the shape isn't right, then you can alter it at this stage, like I said, and you'll find that it'll work. You won't sort of do all the work in getting the lines in and then discover that you've done the proportions look a bit weird. And I'm going to slightly slender, or sort of like just take the corners off those triangular bits like that. And then they have that sort of little mouth. End of the mouth comes in through that long section, and they almost have that sort of teddy bear face, don't they, where the sort of comes in the end. So we're starting to see a kind of wolf face hopefully appearing in those shapes that we've got going on. And then they have quite sort of, there's usually quite strong markings around his eye area. So you get like a sort of extra curve or a kind of circular shape coming in there. And there's very strong parting kind of through. I'm just going to expand the head a little bit so it's definitely going behind his ears. Like that. So we're sort of just softening some of these lines out so that we're getting that feeling of... And this is going to be quite helpful because this is going to give us nice areas that we can work our pattern into. And just sort of get the shape to flow together. Now I'm not going to do a lot more kind of structure wise because we're going to get into the patterns quite soon. So like inside the ear you're going to have that line where the edge of his ear, because the ears are sort of like radar dishes, aren't they? They're like sort of cups. So that sort of shows, and then inside the ear there's always lots of hairs in there, and they both keep the ears warm and help to channel sounds into his hearing, because they have incredible sharp sense of hearing. And then we can imagine all this edge along here, we can make all this kind of soft and fluffy as we go, but that kind of gives us a very basic shape to work on. So we could go over and do all these outlines in sort of black pen and make it really bold, but I'm going to keep it quite I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the pattern to create the kind of shape of the wolf, but I'm just going to be aware of some of these structure lines that we've got in, so we're going to use those as a place to put our pattern structure in. But I think the first thing we're going to do is to get his eyes in, so I'm just checking that my 2 eyes are about the same size, and they've got that nice sort of elongated top and bottom. Now I'm not going to do if this is like the iris of the eye, and so we've got the pupil of the eye is going to sit inside like that. And so what we're going to do is use some just very simple black just to make that shape of the eyes really strong. So again, if you're struggling to get those, don't worry, because I'm going to do them in black pen now, so you should be able to see the shape really strongly. I'm going to be using a mixture of greys and blacks on this. I'm going to keep it quite sort of monochrome because we always think of walls as being these kind of snowy kind of grey colours. It'd be really lovely to try doing one once you build up your confidence on black paper and white pen. I think that would be really gorgeous. But instead of doing the iris, the sort of the eye here white like we might do with a human eye, we're going to keep all this section around here black. So I'm just going to fill that in as a black shape like that, and then we're going to do the pupil as well, but that gives you that nice sort of strong eye shape, which is really sort of indicative of, reminiscent of the animal. And then I'm going to do my circle in for my pupil. I'm going to leave a little white circle inside that because that's going to be my highlight. So I've got like what looks like two circles next to each other, and then that pupil can come in nice and black. And the only colour I might do on this is I might do his irises in a lovely amber colour or something, or gold, because often they have these absolutely beautiful amber eyes. So I'm just going to do the same thing on this eye so that we remember what we're doing. As I always say, if you're doing eyes, try and do each stage on each one as you go, because otherwise you inevitably forget what you did on the first one when you come to do the second one if you leave too long a gap between them. So I'm just colouring that in as a sort of lovely dark eye. And I think once you get the eye in like that, it really sort of, he starts to come to life straight away. You can kind of get that, you get the energy and you get the character of the wolf coming through. So there we go. So I've got two eyes nicely done in black there. And then I think the nose shape, I'm going to do that in black as well. So that's nice and sort of strong, because it'll really kind of like give the face that sort of triangular, that sort of anchor points. So looking at my nose, I think mine's a little bit on the big side. I don't want it to look too clowny. So again, quite handily, I can draw that a bit smaller and draw it down. And if you want to do any kind of dog type animal that has a muzzle like this, they always have this sort of, from the front on, you get this sort of like proper kind of nose on the front like that. And same with big cats and lions, anything like that, they have this nose that is sort of foreshortened to the front wise. And I'm just going to leave a white splodge. I can make that smaller, but I'm just going to leave it as a white sort of highlight there, because again, the animal noses are wet, and so they're quite shiny. I would leave quite a big one, and you could always edit it down later just by reducing the size of it with your black pen. So, but just leaving that bit of light on it just helps to make it look sort of a bit shiny and wet, so that we can get the feeling that it's a live creature. Okay, so hopefully you've got sort of a good outline to work on, and a good basis to start building patterns. So the first thing I'm going to think about is his eyes. Now his eyes have got already, as I said, they've got this kind of, I'm just getting my headphones tangled around so many bits and pieces tangling me up. So we've got this sort of strong shape kind of through here, and this lovely brow kind of shape coming round there to play with. So I'm going to swap to a 0.5 pen. If you don't have a grey pen, then obviously you can do it in black, and it'll still look really gorgeous. Either way, whichever pen that you've got. But I'm just going to define my shape around here. So I'm using the grey pen just to bring that shape, and I'm going to echo the eye shape, like sort of almost like leaving it in white. So I've got like a sort of white eyeliner, and do the same thing here, and just sort of follow that line around like that. And then we've got this sort of shape above his eye, so we imagine there might be an eyelid kind of going on there. So I'm going to put an echoing line again around that top of the eye. So I think the eyes are so intense on these creatures. I think absolutely beautiful. And then I'm going to bring, I've got this big sort of like scoop of the kind of brow shape. So I'm going to bring that in pen and take that round to the outside. Like that on both sides. So we've got that sort of, we're using those sort of outlines to kind of give us a guide of where we're going to build a pattern. So let's start thinking about some patterns in here. I'm going to think really about I'm going to have some curly patterns, but I want to keep some quite sort of zigzag patterns in them, because I always think of them as being sort of wilderness creatures, you know, and sort of like foresty kind of, frosty kind of creatures, you know, there's that sort of perhaps Scandinavian feel to them. So I think we want to have some sort of jagged shapes going on. So I'm going to bring some, I'm just going to start with some very simple rays coming out from the lines, from the eyes like that. But I'm hoping they're not going to look too much like I've drawn massive eyelashes on. So I'm definitely not going to do the same thing above, otherwise it will just look like I've done eyelashes on, which is always it's the eternal problem of someone who's trying to draw cartoons. If you have to try and give your animals a human-like gender, but you don't want to just stick a bow and eyelashes on them. So I'm going to do a long shape coming over here, just to sort of echo that eye shape. So it's just coming into that bottom line there, and the same on this side. Just sort of to bring those round like that. And then I'm going to take some, I think we're going to do some circular patterns coming in on that little tight space that we've got there, which I think already starts to look quite nice and bejewelled. And let's bring them up into that top section, and we can get some shading on these eventually as well with some, but I'm sort of letting them overlap more like half circles once we get into that section here. So again, let's copy it across onto this side. As I always say, you're more than welcome to do any patterns you want to, that you feel the shapes grab you, but these are just what I'm doing. But whatever you do go back and forth like this from one side to the other, so that you kind of have in your memory what you've just done on the side before, so that we don't forget them. Now we've got this sort of shape of the face kind of curving round, so we can use that sort of shape to kind of build things, to kind of give that feeling of the curve of the face kind of moving away. So I'm going to bring some lines coming down his face like this, so they're disappearing kind of off into the shape of the face like that. So it's helping me to get that feeling of that face curving away. So I've done 4 lines on that side to make 3 kind of long channels. So I'm going to do the same on this side. So I can't really draw that without blocking the camera a bit, but let's bring those down like that. So that's just kind of helping to give that face kind of shape. And I want to think about the way we're going to do the sort of muzzle kind of nose area. So I know they often have like whiskers, channels kind of moving across the end here. So let's just draw in where that mouth shape comes, sort of to run to the end like that there. And so let's bring some lines, almost like a sort of teardrop shape coming up and round, because that's kind of helping to give that sort of shape, but also creating a lovely pattern space that we can work on. Let's bring that one up and that one up like that, and then we're going to take these lines and disappear them down into the edge of his muzzle, so they come down and round into that shape. So you've got a pattern that's helping to define the shape, but it's also giving us a nice space to use. And this sort of shape here, look, I think this is just crying out for a long kind of teardrop shape. Look, if we bring that teardrop shape almost up like that, and then we can do another one, kind of come up and meet it. So we've got this sort of long teardrop shape there, and then that's given us, look, it's given us this sort of shape on this edge. So maybe we can take something that's going to come, maybe if we bring this line down to meet it and then sweep that all the way up and round into that kind of eyebrow shape to kind of really exaggerate that, and see if we can do the same on the other side. Like that. There we go. So you've got quite nice strong brow kind of shapes. And wolves often have this quite definite parting going through the middle of their kind of, I want to say hair, but I mean they're all hair, but I mean it's sort of, you know, as if he's got like a sort of haircut, but they often have like it's quite definite parting. So I'm going to use some lines again just to they're all going to sort of chevron off from this central point to kind of help enhance that kind of feeling. So I'm going to bring them over and up like that to the ear. So again, work it in pairs. So do a left one and a right one, so that you've got that rhythm kind of moving up through the shape of the head, and get that sort of slightly almost like raised eyebrow kind of feel. Just to do a left one and a right one coming up, and we're going to keep moving up like this, all the way up like that, sort of up to the top. And then I think we'll just do one more, and it'll start to give a sort of fluffy feel. If you remember when we've did the cat doodle one previously, we kind of left these edges almost slightly raw, so they've got like a sort of shaggy feel. So we're going to build that into it as well. And then there's a final shape sort of coming up into here. So let's take another one of those, and we can bring a shape down from the top of his head, sort of like that triangle. So we've got that hopefully got that nice rhythm kind of going around here. We've got all this sort of like, I said, this sort of main section, as in M-A-N-E section. So let me just do that bottom lip in, and then round here we can get some rays coming down again, but all of these can be divided up into different pattern areas. So you've got all of these to kind of fill. I'm just going to put a slight wiggle in some of them, just to kind of give us hopefully like a sort of fur-like feel, or something that references fur anyway. It's obviously not totally representational, so but we can bring some of these, make some of these into curly points, and just sort of work them around. That's it. And I can just bring these up kind of through. Again, they don't have to match perfectly, because you know, we're trying to do that feeling of a kind of wild creature, so they don't have to be absolutely symmetrical. I think it works quite well without that. And then let's get sort of section under here, kind of a beardy section. Just sort of moving. Again, we're just creating these areas, and we're going to come back and fill all these in with pattern work. But I want to get all the kind of basic structure mapped out, so that we get as much of that finished during the session, so that then you've just got all the fun bits of doing all the pattern work. Not this isn't fun, but you know, you can fill all these up with different kind of pattern ideas. So all these sort of long shapes, and we can see how we're getting almost like sort of like tendrils kind of appearing. So where we've got these sort of gaps in between some of these, I can bring some underneath tendrils just showing through to kind of give that, imagine all those thick layers of sort of winter fur. And these ones I'm just going to turn the ends up into triangles like that, so they've got that sort of tendrily shaggy quality. There we go. Then we can just let some of those appear underneath, and hopefully we're getting that nice sort of movement happening. And I think with these ones that we've got on the head area, I think we can just break those into again, just like sort of slightly fluffy pointy ends, so that they've coming up against his ear, they've sort of got that softness, so they're not being too hard, because they have all this sort of, as I said, they always have all this sort of fur and fluff in the ears. I think fluff is probably not the word, is it really, because that makes them sound like teddy bears, but they have all this sort of shaggy coat going on. So we've got all these sort of ends to bring the shape in. Then we've got, just extend that line down behind. So then we've got the ears to think about. So I'm going to draw just the edge of the ear in, and then this outside edge of the ear is usually quite sort of, again, furry. So I'll just indicate that with a kind of wavy line, or a little slightly zigzaggy kind of line, like that. And same here, so smooth on this edge, because the hair tends to be very smooth on that outer edge of his ear, and a bit more jaggedy kind of coming down. And then I want to create this sort of, because he also have his very long sort of fur inside the ear kind of coming out. So I want to kind of create that. And how am I going to do that? Well, I think I'm going to do, again, that line that's the outside edge, or the inside edge of the ear, sorry. So it just echoes that top line kind of coming through. And then I'm going to take some long lines sort of waving through. So they've got little points at the end, and then they're going to come into the ear, doing that slight sort of curl, so you can sort of feel that they're going down into his ear, and they're narrower than the ones we've used on his face and mane, so they've got that slight difference in scale. Okay, so again, while I remember what I've done, I can then hopefully come in and do the same thing on this side. Here we go. Just sort of bring those in down there. So there we go. So now I've got those sort of ear, and all of these are going to be patterned up big time. And then let me see, we've got this sort of area on his face here, which we haven't sort of done anything with particularly yet. So I'm going to take, I think I'm going to keep using all these sort of lines just to define the shape, and they're sort of curling round his sort of muzzle shape, like that. And you can see how it's really relatively simple. We're just using lines, but letting them curve round the shape to kind of help indicate the way that the shape of the wolf head is formed. But what's good about that is it's now given us all these sort of areas of pattern that we can explore by doing different bits. And I'm just slightly moving off camera so I can pour my tea, which is sort of beautifully presented to me by my lovely assistant in a teapot that is fractionally out of reach if you've got a pair of headphones on. So it's a bit tantalising. It's sort of, can I reach the teapot to pour myself a cup of tea? Yes, I can. You'll be pleased to hear. Right, so now that we've got our kind of outlining in, then we can think about doing some of the patterns that we've started, building on some of those patterns to start getting some more work going on here. So let's think about where the shadows and things are going to come on our wolf, because we're going to use closer together, denser patterns in those kind of areas to give us that more shadowed feel. And then we're going to use thinner patterns in the lighter areas. So again, I'm probably going to stick to my trusty grey 0.5 at the moment. So we want to get the pattern closer together around the edge of his muzzle kind of here, and then let it get a bit fainter as it comes up here, which hopefully will give us a little bit of definition as well as just lovely patterns. So in these sort of areas down here, I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm going to draw from a larger pattern here and then going smaller. So I'm going to choose, let's just choose one of these, and we can just keep it very simple to begin with before we get carried away. And I'm just going to put my chevron pattern in, and the arrows are pointing downwards, and by pointing them downwards it helps again to get that curve of the face. As I go down, as the space around them gets smaller, the chevron arrows get smaller, and if they become diagonals that's fine, and that just helps to get that sense of shadow, because the tighter together your lines come, the darker the overall effect is. So again, swapping over to this side, I'm going to try and keep the patterns roughly symmetrical, coming down and going smaller and smaller, and as they come down they pack tighter together, and that gives me a bit of shadow, and that sort of works quite nicely just to start getting that sort of feeling in. So I want to make sure the patterns are quite different on the pieces that are sitting next to each other. I don't want them to be too similar, otherwise they kind of blend into each other too much really. So I've got a nice sweep down here, so I'm going to tackle this one next. So I've got the circles coming down sort of into this one, so I'm going to bring them down and let them overlap. So they're kind of, if you imagine like a row of petals almost, or coins, and they're going to fill up that space, and then as they come down again you reduce them to fit into that shape with the flow of that shape that we've already mapped out for ourselves, and they come down and down and get smaller and smaller and sort of bring that nice sort of pattern shape. And of course there's loads of potential here to come back and work in between the little negative spaces that that's given us. So again, I'm just going to take sort of almost like they're oozing down into this area, and as they come down they're just going to follow the guideline that shape has given us. And this is always why I think it's so effective working like this, because if we break up the shape into areas and we get them gradually smaller and smaller and then put the patterns into, the end result is that people say, wow, how did you, they can't work out how you've drawn all this. It always looks really interesting. So then we've got another line next to that, so we can see, I might just try a different grey pen. Let's just try a slightly lighter pen. Again, if you're working black, you might want to switch to a lighter one, because it automatically gives us a different kind of feel for this sort of area here. So I want something that isn't chevrons and isn't circles to come down here. So I'm going to do some lines that are going to come down curves, but they're kind of rippling and echoing, and just let them move, and they're going to kind of like revolve round, almost like fan round and spiral round that space. And then again, as they come down, they're going to get really close together, just to add to that kind of shadowing along that sort of jaw edge. So again, let's do the same sort of similar, it doesn't have to be identical, but similar kind of base, so sort of curved lines, but then kind of pivot them so they kind of come down and almost like sort of change direction halfway and bring those down. And if you want to, eventually you can come and turn those into stripes by colouring every other one. So you just keep endlessly making little spaces and then going smaller and smaller on each one. I can zoom in a bit closer so we can kind of see how that's working, hopefully. There we go. So hopefully you can see that sort of different weight, different sort of texture works quite well. So let's do another lighter pen line in here. So let's do I'm going to put an S shape, or sort of spiral in like that, sort of an S shape I suppose, or a wiggle. And again, I'm going to come back and add into this, but I'm going to do it on the other side as well. So I've got, before I get all the pattern going along it, so I've got a similar kind of feel like that. And then I can grow some of my long teardrop shapes, and they kind of come round and branch around in a sort of like the feather spiral kind of doodle, and just come around the shape, and you can work out as you go round, you can sort of grow them round the corners, you can bring them all from one point, but you're sort of following that S line that you've already drawn, and where they come tight in together, again their lines are coming close together, and you get that build up of tone and shadow as these move in amongst each other like that. And if you get an odd space, you can always chuck in a circle. They're always really good for filling a gap like that. So that's just sort of got like a nice feather spiral happening inside this one. So they don't have to be identical, but I'm going to try and do a similar idea on this side, just sort of moving them around, following that S spiral, and just thinking of different ways that I can interlink those and get them to grow round together. And there's a space there, so look, I can fit a nice circle into that. There we go, just bringing some shapes all the way through. There we are, and the sort of initial spiral that you've drawn, the S shape, may completely disappear, and that's fine, because what you're left with is the sort of petal shapes working around that. Right, and again, eventually we could go in and we could colour and shade in between them to kind of give them that, to help them sort of with a bit of definition, make them stand out a bit more. Right, I'm just going to do a quick mute and slurp this fabled tea that has arrived. And that must have been a very loud slurp, because Zoom asked me if I wanted to unmute my microphones. Clearly I was making enough noise to count as talking. So it was obviously a very big slurp indeed. Right, so I've got this. What I'd like to do is sort of try using some darker colours or sort of darker tones in the centre of this kind of passing, and then bring them into a kind of grey colour. So I'm going to use 0.5. I'm going to do 0.5 in black, and I'm going to start a pattern kind of in the middle of these lines, and then I'm going to bring it into grey so that it gets, so we get sort of a contrast. So I'm going to just do a margin line down there to begin with, and then I'm going to bring some curlicue ones just coming along. I'm just going to do like 4 of them, and then I'm going to mirror them as much as possible on the other side. That's it, and bring them round. That's it, so I've got that sort of darker, and then I can swap into my grey pen, or if you haven't got a grey pen, pick up a thinner pen. So this was 0.5, so go for something like a 0.2 or 0.1, and then continue that shape all the way along, and hopefully it should give us this sense of the sort of different colours in the coat, where they have that darker kind of parting up the middle of the forehead. So let's bring those all the way up into that end space. There we go on that side, and you can just see, hopefully you've got that slight darker. I think the effect will become more pronounced as we move up and do the next one. So we'll just bring this in the same way, and again, because we've given ourselves these areas to work in, it's much easier to control the spiral shapes and know what size to do, and it kind of enhances the shapes that we've already drawn by bringing those in. So that's done that with sort of spiral. So let's try a different pattern. We need something a bit spikier to contrast with it. So I think we'll do some triangular ones. So let's do just some really simple zigzag triangles. So we just do a couple in black to be near the edge, just sort of like so they're covering the same space as the spirals really that you did in black, and then take them into the grey. Just bring those zigzags, and again just keeping them moving along the shape that we've already defined. And it's quite a subtle effect, but I think it works. I think you can sort of see it as being a shadow or a darkness in the coat of the wolf, kind of coming through. Take it into the end, and then I think where it's going to really work is like I've got this little diamond shape that's kind of appeared in the centre of his muzzle there. So I'm definitely going to I'm going to get some pattern into that to make that quite dark. I don't want it to be as dark as the eyes, but I do want to make it quite defined. So I'm just going to, I think, echo the shape that I've got there in a sort of diamond form, and just bring those getting closer and closer, just sort of, and then I can even put like a little circle into the middle, just so I've got that sort of extra shadow. And then let's think of up here, we've got room for some waving lines coming through, like that, sort of in the black pen, and then I'm going to do a similar kind of one coming through, just a wave in and bring that through, and then I can swap into the grey again. And you're starting to get a better range of grey pens because they're really useful for doing tonal work like this, or getting different tones into your work. I've got a uni pen that I'm using now. I'm going to bring these into a little curl look just at the end because I can. And Winsor and Newton do a lovely set of grey pens as well, which are great, really nice to use. But even there's some quite generic brands out there that do these sort of grey tones, and they're quite useful to get and play with, particularly because you can do like a sort of black drawing first and then work on them to bring the black in to get the sort of darker tone in. You can go over the top with black, and you can get a nice blend of tones kind of going through. Right, so you think we are sort of, you can see it's subtle, but it's there. I think you see that sort of slight difference going through. So again, we're back onto black for the parting section here. So let's do I think we're going to do, let's do a nice some of those sort of flowery bump ones that we do. So let's put a flower bump in the middle, just to sort of bring those through like a little fan. And we'll do another one. I'm going to put some circles in between, just sort of fitting them in round. And just like a little flower shape sort of overlapping. And again, you don't have to do these patterns at all. You can do whichever patterns you feel like doing, or grab you. And then once I've done them, all the kind of black ones, I can then go into doing some in grey. And clearly I've got quite a floral wolf developing. I don't see why not. Why can't a wolf like flowers? There is this big debate, isn't there? Because people are debating whether or not to reintroduce them into Scotland, because the poor things were hunted to extinction in the sort of, certainly by the sort of late medieval time. They were mostly extinct. But the argument is that the deer population is out of control in Scotland because it doesn't have any predation, and they want to introduce a wolf colony to sort of keep the deer in check. But of course, as you might imagine, the crofters and hill farmers are not very keen on that idea, as I don't think the wolves would go, oh sorry lads, look, we can't go and get those white fluffy ones, those are sheep, And I think one thing history's probably told us is that sheep are not renowned for their deep-seated intelligence when it comes to the animal kingdom. So they do tend to make quite easy targets, particularly as we've bred them to be quite sort of chunky and dumb. But, so I'm afraid the wolves would probably pick the easy option, you know. But I don't know. I think it would be amazing to see them back in the wild. But then I'm not a crofting sheep farmer, so I might think differently if I was. But they do form such an incredible part of our kind of collective mythology. They're still always in all our sort of folk tales and stuff, that sort of, you know, fear of them. So they must have been quite terrifying to come across in earlier times, I feel. Though ours is the most beauteous wolf, and clearly would be far more interested in looking fabulous. Right, so I think I want to get this sort of nice little arch that you've got here above the eye. I'd like to get a bit of shadow into that, so I'm going to do some black patterns just into these two sections, just to help kind of, you know, the overall modelling. Yes, we could continue all the way up here doing sort of patterns on these stripes, but we've got an idea of where we're going with that, so if we get time we'll come back to that. So I definitely think I want to get some dark shadows into here, and so I'm going to do some rainbow shapes also, a little sort of teardrop into the corner there, and then bring these sort of just very simple like half moon, or what I think of as rainbows, but they sort of curl because they curl over, and bring them round, and then as they come over the top I'm going to give them a slight more curl towards that edge, so they start to have a slightly more like a raised teardrop shape, and they're similar to the layer that's coming before, but I think it works quite well in this case, having these two kind of coming around. I've got to take them into this strand of hair here, so as they come round I'm going to stretch them out a bit, and let's break them up so we get like sort of like these floral shapes again, but just coming around just to bring that extra depth. And oh look, mine are going into curlies now, so I've now got curly sort of spirally ones kind of growing out from in there, and bring some of these sort of flower shapes moving round, and just bringing that piece of pattern work all the way into the edge with just the petals kind of coming up into there. There we go. So that's just, and I'm going to put a little bit, just extend that into there. So that's got a nice sort of sweep of pattern. Now I must quickly do the other side while we remember what we did, so that we've got it to copy so we can see across. So again, I just fitted a little teardrop into that point there, and then it was the sort of half moon rainbow shapes coming round. And as ever, I will scan this and send it through to you, and then you can see it in closer detail, and you can get the subtlety of the contrast. But I think you can see the way that's sort of slightly darker kind of coming across. And then we came over the eyebrow, sort of over the hill, and it got smaller and smaller, and then we broke it into 2 or 3 petal shapes rather than singular ones. And then the curls started happening, so they were then curling round, and then we sort of got into these kind of S-bends and building petals and curl shapes off those. Like that, moving round and into these sort of curly areas. And again, they don't have to be the same, but as long as you've got the same kind of feel, then they sort of, you can kind of see where they're going, and they kind of match across to each other. Right, so I think also now I've got my black pen in hand, I think I want to take some of this edge section round his face into the darker tones again, just because it will help us to get a bit of shadow. And I think I'm going to do the same with just this last little segment that comes near his snout. So again, that'll help us to sort of use pattern to give more than just decoration. So I'm just, as it's got a very small space here, I'm just going to do some very simple kind of long teardrop shapes just to fill in. They're not identical spaces, of course, so that will fit quite nicely in on that side. Then I can kind of mimic them a bit on this side. So they're doing the same thing, but it's got to be slightly more on this side. I don't think it matters, but it's just so that I've got a pattern that will work on both sides. And then I've got these little two triangles down here, and I want to make them quite dark, so I'm going to bring just some lines through that shape, but sort of disappearing down into the bottom corner towards the muzzle each time. So that just helps to, and let the lines overlap, and it just adds in that little point of shadow, which just helps to give that sort of feeling of it tucking away underneath. So I'm just bringing them down to that bottom corner, and like that. There we go. So that sort of just helps give that a bit of darkness. Now when we come to the main area, as in his sort of shaggy hairy bit round here, I think I want to do a similar thing to what we've been doing with this sort of parting up here. So I want to start my patterns in black and then finish them in grey, so that you get a little bit of contrast and kind of shadow in them. Oh, dropped a pen lid. Oh dear, can't do that. So let's take some pattern work. Now you could, I think it would look quite nice in one respect to keep the pattern that you've got happening on this sort of stripe into the main of the sort of patterns as well. But of course the trouble with that is that there's more main pieces than there are head pieces, so you might end up sort of getting a bit lost with that. So I'm going to go for doing a different pattern. So I won't do the whole mane now. As I say, we'll come back and we'll sort of dip in and out of them. But things we could do here. So we could do one where we create like a sort of border. So see, I'm stopping it there because I'm going to, let me just get my camera pointing down here a bit more. Let's check that's not too badly focused. So I'm stopping it because I'm going to switch then to grey pen to continue it on down into the bottom there. So now we've got a border, and if you wanted to colour like to give us quite a strong edge, I've actually got a grey brush pen, so I can do that bit of the border in grey like that there. And then when I put the black brush pen, you should see the contrast between those two bits, and starting to hopefully get that sort of shadowing feel. That's it, like that. And then, so whatever pattern I do, I'm going to start off with a black pattern, maybe like a little flame kind of pattern, coming down along that shape. I'm going to get close into that space. I want them to be quite close together here, and just like a sort of slightly fluid chevron as opposed to a sort of very triangular one. And then once I've done that half, I can swap to my grey pen and continue that pattern in grey like that, just sort of bringing that round. And then as you come down to the edge in grey, so hopefully you can see there's that slight difference in tone. So you've got a slightly greyer end here and black here, and again you might want to come back in and make sure that you've got plenty of black pen close up to the face where that you would get the most shadow. So you can go back in and just go in between some of those to kind of remove white, and that gives you that kind of more, like, you can start to see, you get a nice sort of shaded kind of feel. So let's do one that's long, so we can sort of see again how this is going to progress. So for this one, I'm going to like do a second, like a stripe down the middle. So that's going to be the grey part, and this is the black section, and I'm aiming to sort of have them stop or meet each other at the same sort of point as they do on the one next to it. So then my grey brush pen to fill in that end bit there. And black, black pen. That's it, down to meet that one. There we go. And again, you can sort of slightly fatten it up and sort of edit it. And then I'm going to use, let's do circles in this one. So black circles, or maybe little spirals, or little swirly whirls, like little snail shell spirals. So they can be nice with the black pen down this side. To where the transition point comes, and then again these bigger snails on this side, but I expect the world will forgive us. Bringing those down and down. That's it, and then finish it up in grey. And of course, if you were using different colours, you could use, you could use 2 tones of blue. You could do 2 tones of green, to get this sort of effect on any kind of pattern, but it just helps to give that greater sense of light and shadow. I mean, if you want to get really complicated, you could do 3 tones, with a dark, a mid, and a lighter one, if you want to really go for it. But hopefully starting to get that sort of slight edge feel building up. Right, I think that deserves a tea slurp, if you'll just forgive me a second. There you go. That's one of those moments where the tea is just at that most perfect drinking temperature. There's a very sort of, particularly when you're doing art and stuff, you always find that there's like a sort of, you make a tea and then there's a window when it's just too hot and scalding, and then there's a perfect moment, and then about 10, it seems like a second later, because you got distracted by what you're drawing, it's gone cold. So my life is full of like making myself drink half cold cups of tea to kind of, because I don't want to waste it, Right, so let's just do, I'm just going to do a couple more so we hopefully get this really nice shadowed kind of feeling starting to come across, and then we'll have a look at what we can do with the sort of front section of his muzzle. I feel like I want to stroke his nose there. So let's do, again, so black down to a certain point on this section here. Again, this is getting quite shadowy because you've got the muzzle overlapping it, so I'm going to do quite a small pattern that's quite close together. Because again, that will give me a very dark effect compared to lighter areas. So I'm just using, but just very simple lines going quite close together with a kind of curve to them. And then the only tricky bit is that you have to remember to stop them. So initially you've got that what looks like a very white end there, and then pick them up again in the grey pen or the contrasting colour pen. So then you just got to carry them on. And if we let them fade out a little bit so there's more space, or a little bit more space anyway, that should give us that sort of shadowed effect coming through. I think under here I'm just going to do a really thick solid one, like a completely filled in one, just to sort of see how that's going to work. So I can do all of that one down to halfway in a big solid black line. Sometimes just really simple areas of solid colour can work really well in a pattern. I'm just going to take that all the way down that edge because you've got that slight overlap feel. So that's that one there, and then I'm going to put in the grey pen into this bit here. So we should see that division quite strongly on this piece. Just fill in those little, there we go. So that's sort of, hopefully you can see that. I think if I just turn the light a little bit more onto it, maybe that'll be more obvious. I swear the difference, it looks exactly the same, doesn't it? But there is on this side of the camera, there's quite a distinct difference between the top and the bottom of that one. It'll come through better on the scan, I fear. Right, so then I've got this section under here. So let's try doing, see if we can do one of our S curls to follow that. So I'm going to put my S through here, but I have to stop it there and take the grey like that sort of through, and some petal shapes coming off that. And again, you can always go back and colour in between these. It's going to make all these little sort of negative space triangles and shapes in between these sort of petals and the leaf shapes coming down, which give you more scope for adding into. And then once I've got the black ones in, then we can go and you can do some little circles. There we go, just to sort of bring those leaf shapes in. There we go. So we've just got those in. And if we wanted to make that effect even stronger, we could go back in with a smaller, like a very light, thin black pen, and we can just add some, oh dear, this one maybe, oh, it has got some life in it. Sometimes the little ones tend to dry up faster. We can add some thin kind of black lines. I think this one may be on its way out. You'll have to go to the pen graveyard, which is the bottom drawer of my workbench. Like that. So we can just add some extra sort of lines into that, sort of just to add some shading kind of effect. I'm just trying to see if I've got a black pen, because I'm usually picking up all the grey ones, but you know, you could even do it with sort of grey as well, just to add those sort of bits in, just to get a bit more shade kind of coming under here, just to sort of tone that in a bit. And then let's just do that last little, I've got a little thin section kind of coming down through here, so that I'm going to do as a solid piece pretty much again, sort of moving down into there. And then where's my grey pen? Having a moment where I can't see the pen. It's wood for the trees moment. I've got so many pens in front of me I can't see the one I want. That's because I'm holding it in my hand. So I can just do that in darker, but in a grey, like that. It's one of these effects that builds up really well over time. So let's have a look at the sort of front of his nose here, sort of like his muzzle section. You can see how we can take all these gorgeous thick patterns all the way up the side and round on both sides, and that's going to look really lovely. So I think we just want to establish that there's that slight dark shape, like a little triangle kind of coming round there. And then this area, certainly above his nose here, I'm going to start off with a grey pen, and I'm going to do a circular based pattern, because they often have these little circles of where like whiskers would come from. You have a little sort of, you can see quite an indentation. So I'm just going to do them as circles, but I'm going to take them all the way round. I've got some space in between them this side, so I'm going to leave that to leave some white space into the patterns. And then as I bring them up, on the next one rounds, we'll do something a bit stronger. But I think it's just quite nice just to bring that floating dot pattern all the way round, and try and get one right in the middle, sort of centre point there, and then bring these round and back down again. And they don't have to match up exactly, but hopefully you'll get them to sort of roughly look like they're sort of, you know, doing it with some purpose. And then I'm going to have some lines coming up into that centre point on that one, so they're going to fan out and disappear into that point. I'm using grey, but I'm just going to bring those up into that point, and I can just soften the ends around so they become more like sort of long teardrop shapes like that sort of coming around. And then I want to get a bit more of a dark pattern or a closer pattern into this sort of area here. I think because it will help to sort of, again, be a little bit like shadow. So let's do some petals or dragon scales, however you want to think about them, moving round. I've recently moved my studio into a new studio. I have finally got a studio as opposed to having one side of the end of the sitting room. So I'm down in my own little space, which is fantastic. But my two cats are quite confused as to why I'm down here, and they keep coming in and exploring, and everything is sort of still in boxes, you know. So my large cat has just come in and delightedly got into a box of stuff and is leaping around inside it. I once watched him spend a good 10 minutes trying to get, he's quite a big cat, and he's trying to get all of him into a man-sized box of tissues. And he'd got his front paws in, and he just about got one of his back legs in, and he couldn't work out why the fourth one wasn't, because he was trying to go round and round, and as he was going round, the sort of box of tissues was going round, and he was just sort of revolving, stuck in this box of tissues, trying to get into this nice oval hole. So, yeah. He really doesn't have any concept of how big he is or how anything is in relation to him. So it's just sort of got those. And as they're quite close together here, again, they add a bit of shadow. Then as they come up, we can open them out and get them into larger shapes. And it just gets that little bit of contrast between the pattern sizes. And it just adds a little bit more light, a little bit more modelling. And it just, although again this is obviously a very stylised wolf, it just also helps to give it that slightly three-dimensional feel, or sort of like a nod to shade and tone and a bit of reality. So I can just take those around there. So we've got those nice sort of shapes building those around. And then under here on his chin, I think I'm going to do like a sort of flower. So I've got to have a central petal kind of coming up and spreading out from that point. And the fact they're spreading up and then curving up around that shape will help just to establish that as being sort of the curved underneath curve of his muzzle. And just sort of bring those up and round like that. And then so you can see where you've got you get little triangles in between. That's my beloved negative space triangle shapes, that if you go in and you just shade in between them, that helps to just bring more detail into that pattern. It just gives it a bit more form, and I think it works really well. So I think we're starting to get a really nice feel of how we can develop all these into some beautiful patterns. Let's have a go at putting in his amber eyes before too much longer. So the only time we're going to switch into some colour pens. So I've got an orange relatively fine liner pen, and I've got a yellow one. These are quite nice ones. They're sort of ones that you can actually use them like watercolours. Once you've drawn, you can use a bit of water and kind of spread them. If you haven't got anything like that, you can easily use colour pencil. But I'm just going to rub out, because there's a fair bit of pencil mark in the eye. So I'm not going to probably bother with many of the other pencil marks, but I just want to take out the pencil marks in that eye, because I'm going to use fairly pale colours in there to begin with. I don't want them to get too mucked up with the grey pencil. So I'm going to start with my yellow brush pen, or this could be your yellow pencil if you've got yellow colour pencil, just to put that colour in. See, straight away that really helps to make the eyes stand out, doesn't it? Gives them a real sort of impact just to have that little hint of colour. And then with the orange pen, I'm going to do little tiny flecks kind of coming up from the outside. So little flicks up and round, and all the little flicks are pointing in towards the pupil. But just that little bit just adds that extra touch of colour. And let's see if I can zoom in really close. And I think you can just about see, you just get a little extra texture. And it just stops the eye just being a flat colour. It just gives it a bit more of that detail. If you leave, you can always go and do an actual ring around the edge once you've got the flicks, but leave the flicks looking like little spokes, because that kind of gives you the feeling of the way the eyes work. It gives you that kind of feel. I think that just really helps to kind of bring him to life and give him a really sort of fantastic stare. Oh, ears. Let's have a look at the ears before we have to stop. So if I just bring, I'm just going to move him down a little bit. Let's just tilt that. So it's so difficult to light it because the camera sees so much more of the light than I do. But there we go. I think that's a bit better. Right. So what we're going to do is I want to keep these hairs in his ear looking fairly pale overall, so I'm going to make some pattern sort of around the edge that's quite dark. So let's work on this one. So I'm going to do some shapes up in here, and I'm fitting them into the end of those first lot of shapes that you put in. These sort of like flamey kind of teardrop shapes are fitting into those ones that are there. So we're going to use them as a kind of background contrast so that the hairs on this side are going to look a bit paler. So let's bring all those in, and we can add some extra layers into those to sort of, again, just echoing those shapes kind of coming out from the bottom of each one, just to make them a bit darker, because I want them to get a bit of shadow to contrast to the sort of shapes on the inside. I mean, like I always say, and I've said it already, I'm going to say it again, any patterns you want to do will work, but think about the rhythm of what we're doing with them. So we're trying to get some of the lines closer together so that they add some shadow, and so they help, and by making these ones darker they make these sort of softer inner ears hairs kind of stand out whiter against them. And then I might just take a black line up and around there, and I can bring some lines just coming up into that edge there, so we just add some, and they're just flicking upwards, just moving down, very simple, just almost like very, very elongated curves, just sort of filling in that space, but just using the black pen. But by having that upwards curve, they're just helping to give that feel of that fringing around the edge of his ear, because they've got a direction that's kind of going in the way the hair would grow. I think that's really key to making this sort of pattern work, is that you're thinking about the way that the hair would grow on the animal and then taking your pattern in that sort of direction. So then I'm going to swap to a grey pen, and this is the same sort of thing. I want my patterns to all kind of be growing upwards, kind of that way. So whatever, I don't want them to be sort of hanging down, they've got to be moving up. So whatever patterns I choose, there can just be, there's going to be some curled lines and then a curlicue and then some more curled lines. So three lines curling up and then a curlicue shape. Just very simple, doesn't have to be loads of complicated geometry, but it's just all the patterns are going upwards. So when I do zigzags, they're kind of, I'm looking at the one going up and there's a corresponding one going down, but I'm thinking about moving them upwards. And then even with the circles, they're travelling up that shape. So hopefully we're going to help that feel of it growing upwards. And it's just going to help with that sort of feeling of the way it's moving up into the sort of space. So let's do some petals. I've got quite a fine pen here again, because the area here would be very delicate fur, sort of quite delicate long hairs. I want the patterns to have that feel, so I've chosen a light 0.1 pen just to give that feel. So, where I want things to be chunkier and heavier, I'm going to use thicker pens. And here I'm just using this quite light pen and just using these patterns with this overall upwards feel. as if they're growing up towards the sun, and that just helps to pull those patterns up, and it just helps the sort of, I always think of it as it is a reality. It's a reality that we're creating where we have beautiful patterned walls, so they can still obey the laws of physics even if they're Zentangle walls. So then just some circles coming through. Last little bit on this side. Let's see if we can get all of this side sort of mapped out. Just sprays coming up, and there we go, just the last few in. And okay, so as we can see, that's going to give us that nice sort of feel and contrast of the pale fur is nice and standing out against this very sort of dark edge. And of course, once you've got all the patterns in to all these kind of areas, then you can take your pens and go in and kind of, so if I look at this sort of circular pattern coming down in grey, I can work further into that. I can start off by using my black pen here. Look, I'm just finding those little spaces in between those circles to draw in. So you think you've done a row of pattern, but then there's always more you can go in and discover. So if I do that all the way along, like that, all the way through, and that starts to just following the shapes that you've got. You might decide to blend it into the next bar of pattern, but I'm just going to focus on that one now. And then if I don't even want to get even more kind of 3D modelling going on, I'm going to get my grey or fine 0.1 pen, and I'm going to put some little tiny like shading lines underneath those edges, and that starts to give those just little rays of lines coming out across those circles that we drew in, but that will start to give them a slightly 3D overlapping feel, and I can bring that through all the way down, and it just starts to kind of give it that nice kind of, it's very subtle, but it just gives it that feeling of being things have overlapped on top of each other. What we haven't looked at is this nice section that we started off with quite early on, kind of coming down from his eye. So I think I'm going to, where I've got these sort of nice striations, I'm going to turn those into, I'm going to round off the ends, look, by just bringing a shape down and then putting those little petal shapes into that shape, pulling up. I think it's a similar shape did with the elephants actually, but I think it works quite effectively, obviously with both eyes. And then again, you could use your grey or whatever colour to come in round those just to make them a bit more defined. Just to move those round. And then once you've got that nice petal shape, then I think we can do some spirals into that. So I'd get something lighter again, like a 0.1, and we can bring some S spirals through, and keeping it to this sort of quite modest monochrome palette. I think it sometimes can be really effective. Sometimes it's wonderful to do full-on Technicolor, Josie's Dreamcoat kind of thing, and that would also just work really well with this. But also sometimes the subtlety of having just all these greys and monochrome tones kind of working together allows you to contrast really beautifully with the sort of strong eye colour, and I think it can just be really effective too. And then you can say, like, well, you've got these chevrons here, which we knew was going to happen. We're going to want to colour those in, so they're not just outlines, but we're going to want to shade those in so they become, more defined, moving down and down the shape, so they disappear in. And we could also do the colouring round this sort of all the sort of S-curve feather spirals that we put in just by going round and picking out the little spaces in between. And it doesn't take much, but you can see how that really starts to make that pattern a bit more defined, makes it pop out. And as you've got all those lovely pattern shapes that you've put in just by going along and doing those little triangles, that's going to just make it stand out And it doesn't take long, but it's really worth doing, I think, just to give it that extra bit of definition. And I'm going to colour all of that into quite a big loop coming round. There we go. So that just helps to pop those out and give them a bit more definition. And then you can start to see them a bit more. And then we're really sort of getting some lovely feeling and some lovely depth into all the patterns that we've got going on in here. And gosh, I think we are probably going to have to end the session about there, because we've got to the end, which doesn't seem possible, but there we go. Because I was really enjoying that. And this will give me, hopefully I will have time over the summer to do a bit more of that. I'm quite tempted to add some colour, maybe in just his eyeliner, but we'll see. But there we go. So that is our start of our fantastical timber wolf. And there we go. And I think you can see you've got loads more to do on it, but also loads more fun to be had with it.